My wife and I have been married for 6 years. We met at work and instantly connected. As employees, we were discouraged from dating others in the office. So, I spent all of my time trying to make her laugh and joking with her about the other people around us. Eventually, I found a new job at a great place, and on my last day in the office, I asked her out. She said yes, and we fell in love. We got married after about a year and a half of being together, and it was one of the best decisions of our lives. The pandemic happened early on in our marriage, and at first it was causing some stress. We had been used to being away from each other during the work days and only really seeing each other on weekends and evenings. It isn't that we didn't love each other, but we both had our own time for ourselves. The pandemic really got both of us thinking about our health. We were both relatively healthy. We ate well for the most part, and before the pandemic, we got most of our exercise from running around our respective offices. However, with the pandemic, we were very sedentary and both of us were putting on a little bit of weight. When things started to clear up, we both decided that we wanted to get a gym membership. We went together, and we had a good time focusing on this new lifestyle. On top of that, we both really loved exercising, and we could see the benefits of it fairly quickly. We started going to the gym together 3 or 4 times a week. The more we went, the more confident we were. Our membership was at a local place, owned by someone we knew, so we recognized a lot of the people at the gym. There was a sense of community there that we liked. One day, while we were driving back from the gym, my wife asked me who my gym crush was. I was taken aback by the question because it seemed like a weird thing for her to ask. She assured me that she wasn't going to take it the wrong way, but she'd seen me paying attention to some of the other girls in the gym, and she was just curious. In fact, she promised to tell me hers. I thought about it for a moment, and I realized that I was confident enough in our relationship to have that conversation with her. Of course, neither of us was the only person we were attracted to. We are both human after all. As long as neither of us acted on those impulses, we were fine. I told her who mine was. We'll call her Heather. Heather went to the gym with her fiancé, and we crossed paths with both of them often. My wife confessed that her crush was Heather's fiancé. We'll call him Joe. We teased each other about it after we confessed, but it was never really something that came up again. Several months later, I was playing basketball with some friends from the neighborhood, and I landed very badly and tore a ligament in my knee. I had to go through some physical therapy alongside months of rest. During those months, I wasn't able to go to the gym with my wife. She was still going, which I had no issues with whatsoever. She had been very passionate about her fitness and activity after the fact, so I was happy she was still doing it. I just wished that I could have gone with her. After the injury, I found myself in a depressive episode. I was trapped in my house for the majority of my time, and I was feeling isolated and alone, so I took up some bad habits. I put on a little bit of weight, and some of the muscle tone that I had earned over the months of going to the gym disappeared. It didn't help my depression that I could see it happening and felt helpless to stop it. I complained about the issues I was having with my body to my wife often, and she did what she could to assure me that it wasn't an issue, and she would love me no matter what. However, her actions spoke differently. It seemed like she didn't want around me as much. She had been laid off during the pandemic and still wasn't working, but she was out all the time running errands. On top of that, we weren't having sex. I took it as her not being attracted to me, but I didn't want to go to her and ask about that. I think a big part of me was too afraid to hear the truth. She started going to the gym more and more, and I started to realize that she was going 5 or 6 times a week, which was more than we had really gone. It definitely seemed like she just wanted to get away from me. Months passed, and I was done with my rest and going to physical therapy to try and get everything back to normal. When I was finally cleared to be off crutches and able to begin light exercise again, I jumped at the opportunity. My wife gladly brought me back to the gym, and everybody else there seemed happy that I was back. I was friendly with just about everybody at the gym. That included Heather and Joe. My first week back, everybody, including Heather, came over to me and asked me all about my recovery and how I was feeling. I didn't notice it at the time, but Joe was steering clear of me. Looking back after I returned to the gym, he and I hadn't had a single conversation with each other. I couldn't remember him talking to my wife either. Because I was still recovering, I wasn't able to go to the gym very often. I had to take it easy and make sure I was giving myself time to recuperate. I was going to the gym every other day for the most part. My wife kept going at her normal pace. I was working from home, so thankfully I was able to step out and take walks or things like that whenever I wanted to, as long as I was getting my work done. My wife told me one morning that she was going to the gym in the afternoon. It was one of my resting days, so I hadn't planned on going with her. Around lunchtime, I was feeling fidgety, like I had a lot of energy that I needed to get rid of. I figured I could take an hour and go cycle or walk on the treadmill, so I made my way over. My wife told me she was going to be there, so I was expected to see her inside when I arrived. I looked around for her, and she was nowhere to be seen. I asked a woman at the front desk if she saw my wife, but she told me that she didn't think she'd come in yet that day. I was worried right away. I trusted my wife, and when she told me she was going to the gym, I believed her. If she wasn't there and she wasn't at home, she was somewhere between her house and the gym, and somehow she didn't make it there. My mind wandered to the worst case scenarios, so I rushed back to my car and slowly made the drive home to see if I could spot anything. I didn't see her car in a ditch or anything like that, which eased my mind. I called her when I got back to see where she was, but she didn't answer. I felt completely helpless. In my mind, my wife was being held captive in someone's basement, and there was nothing I could do about it. I waited for about an hour, and then she walked in the front door. She was still in her workout clothes, as if she had gone to the gym when I knew that she hadn't. I asked her where she was, and she told me she was at the gym. Obviously, I knew that she was lying. I just didn't know why. I explained the situation to her and told her that I didn't see her at the gym, and I was worried. She played it off like she didn't understand why the worker said I wasn't there, suggesting that there might have been a shift change while she was there. She told me that she was in the sauna for a while, which might explain why I didn't see her there. The excuses she gave made sense, but something was telling me not to believe them. I saw with my own eyes that she wasn't there. I was scoring around for her car, and I didn't see it anywhere in the lot at the gym. My wife was lying to me, and my paranoia started taking full control of my brain. Later that night, while she was asleep, I took it upon myself to find out the truth of what was really happening. I grabbed her phone and looked through it for any clues about where she was. I found that within seconds of opening her phone, she was with Joe. Their messages were all pretty tame. There were a few messages where they would tell each other they missed each other, but for the most part, it was them planning times to get together. They were hooking up a few times a week. Apparently, Joe worked from home while Heather didn't, so whenever she would leave, my wife would head over to their house. I was completely heartbroken by what I saw, especially when I put the pieces together that their affair started while I was home recovering from my injury and feeling very bad about myself. It seemed like everything I thought about my relationship with my wife was wrong, and it was devastating to learn that. I knew that I needed to divorce her, but while I looked over the text messages, I didn't think it was sufficient evidence to prove that there was an affair. It seemed like there could be something going on, but there wasn't anything in there that explicitly mentioned they were having sex. I needed to see it for myself and get some kind of proof. I did a quick search online for some kind of app or something I could download on my wife's phone to be able to track her. It sounds awful, but I needed to know when she was actually going to the gym and when she was going to Joe's house. My intention was just to follow her there and make sure I could get the proof I needed. I found one and got it set up so next time she told me she was going to the gym, I could be ready. After 2 days, my wife told me that she was going to the gym. I waited for about half an hour after she left and checked the app. She was not at the gym. I quickly finished up what I was doing with my work and I made my way over to the address she was at. I walked to the front door and looked at a piece of mail to see that it was Joe's house. My wife's car was in the driveway, so I knew that I was going to be possibly witnessing one of the worst things I could imagine. I realized that I couldn't get into the house, so that posed a bit of a problem for me. I needed to see what was happening, so I did something a little bit illegal. I opened an electric bill belonging to Heather, and I got her phone number from that. I called her and explained everything. She was skeptical at first, but she agreed to head right over to see for herself if I was right about everything. I hid the electric bill in my car, so they would never know that I had to open it to contact her, and I waited for her to arrive. As soon as I saw her, I walked to the door with her. When she opened the front door, the chain lock was up. That immediately made her suspicious. That was never up, so she thought it was him trying to keep her out of the house. We snuck around to the back door, and she let us both in through there. When we got in, we could hear music playing from the bedroom, and I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. All of the signs pointed to my wife having an affair, but there was still part of me that had the slightest bit of hope that I was misreading things. Of course, that wasn't the case. Heather led me to the bedroom where she opened the door to see my wife and Joe together. They were both surprised to see us there. Heather ran up to Joe and started hitting him on the head with her purse. I couldn't blame her for reacting that way. My wife covered herself as quickly as she could and tried to explain herself to me. She told me that it just happened while they were at the gym. She tried to tell me it was the first time anything like that had happened, and she regretted it. I told her that I knew she was lying and there wasn't any point in to expect to get divorced. She still hadn't found a job since being laid off from hers during the pandemic. She had gotten quite comfortable with not working, which had been a point of contention in our relationship in the past, but I made enough for us to still live comfortably. She tried to convince me to change my mind about it right there while we were standing in the doorway of the room she was just cheating on me in. I told her that my mind was made up and I was going through with it. She was angry about that, and as I was walking away, she told me that she wasn't attracted to me anyway and that I couldn't ever really satisfy her. I knew the second part was a lie, but the first part of what she said stunned. I had my insecurities about how I looked after the injury, and hearing somebody who is supposed to love you say it wasn't a blast. Heather and I both ended up divorcing our partners, and we wrote letters to each other's divorce attorneys explaining everything that happened since we didn't have any photographic evidence. I kicked my wife out of my house, and she ended up moving in with Joe. They were apparently in love with each other and planned on spending the rest of their lives together. They both got married a few months after the divorces were finalized, which I know now that they regret because they're in the process of divorcing. Heather and I talk to each other on occasion, and we laugh about how dumb of a decision it was for them to remarry so quickly. From everything I gathered, Joe ended up cheating on my ex-wife with another woman from the gym. That's what sparked their divorce. I'm happy knowing that my ex-wife was forced to get a job and spend a good portion of her earnings paying for two separate divorce attorneys. Opie, your injury sounds like it was a lot for you to handle, and it seems like your wife wasn't there for you throughout it. You were vulnerable in telling us about your insecurities with your body after everything, and it seems like you expressed that to your wife too. For her to know that and make you feel the way that you did is awful, especially telling you at the end of the relationship that she cheated on you because of that. I think her true colors were clear when she adamantly lied about being at the gym when you knew that she wasn't. You caught her in the lie, and yet she still held to it. Obviously, I doubt she would confess to what she did at the time, but the fact that she kept up a lie like that says a lot about her. It's good that both you and Heather divorced your partners, and I think it is kind of funny that they both got married and divorced so quickly. Joe cheating on your wife is karma for her. I can only hope that Joe gets something back at him sometime soon, and I agree your wife had to pay a lot of money for two separate divorce attorneys in a very short amount of time, and that is pretty awful for her. I hope you are taking time to take care of yourself again and feel comfortable in your skin. I know going through something like this with your partner is pretty disheartening, but I do wish that you will find someone in the future who will value you and respect you in a relationship. Now, let's move on to our next story. My girlfriend and I met when we were both fresh out of high school and working in the same grocery store over the summer. We were both going to college out of state, but we lived just one town over from each other. We got to talking while we worked there, and we hit it off. I was a bit of a late bloomer when it came to dating, so I didn't realize that she had feelings for me when she did. She ended up asking me out because I was clueless about her feelings toward me. Of course, I said yes. I thought she was amazing, and I jumped at the first opportunity one had to go out with her. We continued dating through the rest of our college years, occasionally going to visit the other person on weekends or breaks when we had the chance. But we looked forward to those summer breaks when we could spend 3 months with each other virtually uninterrupted. She was my first love, and I was completely convinced at the time that she and I were going to be together forever. I know now that was just childish naivety, but I was hopeful. The main reason she went to the university that she did was because they had an incredible study abroad program. I knew that in the summer between her junior year and senior year, she was planning on going to London. I knew that from the moment I met her because she was very excited about it. That summer, I got to see her for about a week before she flew out to attend her summer program. We still talked often because I wanted to hear all about her travels, so we FaceTimed and texted each other whenever we had the chance. I was happy for her, but I missed her like crazy. I was complaining about it to my parents, and they could see how upsetting it was for me, so they offered to pay for a plane ticket to go see her. My girlfriend was excited about it when I told her, and we planned the perfect time to get together, so she could show me some of her favorite spots in the city and we could spend time together. She told me about a lot of the friends that she made while she was in her program. Of course, I didn't know every single one of her friends, but from what I gathered, it didn't seem like anything was going on. A couple of weeks before I was set to take my trip, she was pretty much MIA in terms of phone calls or responding to my messages. She would check in now and then just to tell me that she was fine, but she wasn't giving me anything else. I had a bad feeling about it, initially thinking that maybe something was going on and she was trying to ghost me, but that didn't seem like something she would do, so I wasn't sure. When it got closer to my date of departure, she was communicating with me a lot more. She told me that she had been stressed out with class stuff and was sort of in a bad place because of it. I felt bad for assuming anything else was going on. I flew to London, and she met me at the airport to take me back to the flat she was staying in. She introduced me to a lot of her friends. The only person that she introduced me to that I didn't know about beforehand was a guy that we'll call Dan. I hated being this way, but seeing the guy that I knew was probably hanging out with my girlfriend without me automatically raised some red flags. My girlfriend was beautiful, and in my eyes, anybody would have been foolish not to want to be with her. However, I quickly picked up on the fact that he was dating another one of my girlfriend's friends, who we will call Katie. The two of us went sightseeing the first day that I was there. She showed me some incredible places, and we went to some lovely cafes and bookstores. The second day that I was there, we went on a double date with Dan and Katie. There was this fun arcade that we went to, and afterward we went for a walk in a park. Katie and I actually had a lot in common when it came to the video games at the arcade. It was a place that she suggested we all go to because she loved it, and my girlfriend and Dan weren't really into things like that. So it might have been a little bit of my fault in this, but I spent the majority of that time talking to her about the games. Dan and my girlfriend were sitting at the table together, and I happened to look over at them at one point to see them smiling and laughing at each other with Dan reaching for her hand. It immediately brought back all the suspicions that I had. When everything was over, I asked my girlfriend about it. She told me that it was nothing and he was just making a joke and he was a touchy person. That didn't make me feel any better. We ended up getting into an argument about it because I felt like she was lying to me. It was difficult because we only had a couple more days together in London before I had to go back to the States and get ready for my senior year. After that, we wouldn't see each other until the winter break. I could tell that she was still upset with me in the morning, but we apologized and decided that we wanted to make the best of the time we would have together. I didn't see Dan or Katie again for the rest of the time I was in London. I got back home and I was bummed with how everything went while I was with her. I went back to school for the first semester of my senior year, and things seemed to be normal between us. We were communicating over the phone like we always did during the semester. I saw her again over the winter break, and things were different between us. She was cold and less open to me than she normally was. By that time, I wasn't thinking about the argument we had, and I genuinely didn't understand why she was acting the way that she was. Whenever we would talk, it would always be about things not related to us. Specifically, she would always tell me about things that were going on in the group chat she had with the people that she met in London. I know she adored all of them, and she considered them to be very close friends. She was contemplating moving to London after graduation and getting an apartment with them. I spent New Year's Eve with her, and I noticed that she didn't want to be around me much. We were at a party at a bar in her hometown, and around midnight, I went to find her to kiss her when the ball dropped. Just as I was about to kiss her, she turned her face away from me, so I kissed her cheek. I was surprised, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. When we got back to her house after everything, I asked her about it. My gut was telling me that she did it because she didn't want to commit to me for a year, and it was some superstition that she had. She made it seem like I was looking into it too much. I slept over at her house that night, but I couldn't get the idea of it out of my mind. We had been drifting apart for some time, and I didn't want to lose her, but it felt like I was. It was about 3 a.m., and I couldn't sleep. I was just lying in bed next to her, and I heard her phone buzz on the nightstand showing Dan's name. From my understood, they didn't talk to each other much aside from group settings. Seeing him reach out to her was confusing. I quietly grabbed her phone and read the message. He wished her a happy New Year's and said that he was sorry for not being her midnight kiss. That prompted me to look through their other messages, where I saw that they had been exchanging pictures and videos of each other for months. From some of the context, I clearly understood that they had been sleeping together while she was in London. I knew that I was right to be suspicious about what was happening with Dan. My gut told me something was going on with them, and my girlfriend lied to me when I asked her about it. I didn't see any way that I could continue being with her after what happened, and it didn't seem like she wanted to make it work either. I sent myself screenshots of their messages, so I would have them, and I left. I didn't tell her about what I was doing, and I didn't give her any heads up that I knew about her and Dan. I just left and didn't tell her anything. She was going to be wondering what happened for a little while. I didn't talk to her for the rest of the break, even though she messaged me a few times wanting to get together before we left for our final semesters. I went back to school and continued ignoring her. I could tell from her messages that she was hurt by my completely ghosting her, which I was thankful for. She hurt me and I wanted her to be hurt back, but I also wanted to do something else. I didn't feel like it was enough to get back at her for how she hurt me. I stood on it for a while and eventually decided to reach out to her friends from London and let them know what my girlfriend had been doing with Dan. I threw all of them in a group chat, and I explained everything, sending screenshots of the evidence to them. I didn't respond much in the chat, but it blew up with all of them expressing how shocked they were and telling me how sorry they were for me. On top of that, they kept mentioning how there were signs all along, but they didn't want to believe it. Dan's girlfriend Katie was in that chat, and she was talking about how she was going to make him regret what he did. Surprisingly, they didn't kick me out of the group chat. I was in it, and they kept checking in with me to see how I was doing. They seemed like a solid group of people. From what they told me, they all stopped talking to my girlfriend because they couldn't stand her for what she did. My girlfriend reached out to me after she found out what happened and told me that I had no business going through her phone. Her main point was that I invaded her privacy and ruined her plans for after graduation. She couldn't afford to live in London on her own, so she had no way of making that dream come true. Katie got her revenge on Dan by sleeping with his brother. Normally, I wouldn't condone behavior like that, but it was pretty funny. Not only did she break up with Dan, but she potentially ruined his relationship with his sibling. I guess that was one way to get revenge. Now I have graduated, and that was a couple of years in the past. I'm not close friends with any of those girls from that group chat, but we're still friendly. I do know that if I ever end up in London again, I can hang out with a couple of them, and we can have a nice little reunion. Oh, V, I'm so sorry I had to go through all of that. It seems like your girlfriend might have been feeling guilty when she wasn't talking to you for that week before you arrived. I could understand if she was feeling panicked about the possibility of you coming into contact with Dan. Their demeanor in the bar definitely clued me into the affair they were having. They must have just forgotten that they were there with their partners and were acting like it was a date. I always think it's interesting when people take their partners on double dates with their affair partners. There must be some level of false confidence involved that makes them think that they can get through that without any signals. It's good that you cut her off completely. It's better to do that than try to give her a chance to sway your mind to stay with her. I'll never understand why somebody who is unhappy in a relationship will stay in it and cheat rather than do the right thing and end the relationship before moving on. Breakups are tough, but they're worlds better than being cheated on. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. One quality I, 40, admired in my wife, 44, was her enthusiasm for holidays. She said whenever she gathered with others to celebrate, it felt warm, fuzzy, and magical. Easter was no exception. She loved dyeing eggs and taking the kids on Easter egg hunts. Even though our twins grew to be too old for Easter egg hunts, she maintained her holiday routine. In preparation for Easter, she collected and boiled our chickens' eggs, dyed them, usually with the help of our sons, and used them in the egg hunt for the younger kids at the church. Besides basically hosting the church event, she also planted a large combination of daffodils, crocus, and hyacinth seedlings. She had at least 200 flowers ready for sale 9 days before Easter. She transported them with her econoline from the grow tent in the backyard to her selling spot on the corner by the supermarket. I helped her with this project every year, including last year's Easter holiday, when unbeknownst to me she met AP. There were no clues that she was communicating with another romantic partner. She would just so casually tell me she was talking to her mother. I did not get along with my MIL. She drove me crazy, but I tolerated her for my wife and children's sake. By this Easter, our twins were 15 years old, so they didn't exactly jump up to go to Grandma's house. Thank goodness. I had a reason to stay home now. How could I have known I couldn't trust my wife when she told me she was talking to her mother or going to see her mother? On this Easter Sunday, my wife already had the eggs hidden for the children to find in the grass and trees behind the church. The teenagers wanted to stay home, and since my wife told me her mother was going to be at the church, probably close to my wife, I elected to stay home. About 30 minutes after my wife left, her mom called the house phone. I was a little concerned, so I answered it. It became clear that she never intended to join the Easter egg hunt this year. She was calling to see if my wife could come over after church to clip her toenails. I shuddered and hung up. Since I distinctly remembered her telling me her mother would be there, my hunch told me something was up. I let my teenagers stay home and went to the egg hunt. I spotted my wife standing alone, watching the children hunt for eggs. I walked over to her, and as soon as I greeted her, I saw panic in her eyes. She kept glancing at the church building, like she expected someone to come out any minute. She quickly asked me why I was there, but before I answered, she told me her mother would be back out from the restroom any minute, so I should go back home. I calmly and grudgingly told her that I already knew her mom wasn't here. Her face and neck turned red, and she started itching until she saw a man come out of the church and start heading towards us. She quickly told me the man headed our way was just a friend that wanted to date her, but she already told him she was married. I was confused and hardly had time to think before he asked me if I was the reason she ghosted him the past week. I said excuse me, and then told him she was my wife, and we were married for the past 19 years. He was immediately deflated and told me they'd been seeing each other for a year. I was taken aback. It felt like the wind was knocked out of me. She told me that wasn't true and that he'd been harassing her to the point where she considered calling the police. I just looked at her like she was crazy and asked how that could have been happening without me knowing. AP called her a liar and demanded she tell me about their plans for the future. When she covered her face, he grabbed her wrist to move her hand, and without thinking, I pushed him in an attempt to stop him from touching her. This resulted in us fighting. I remember getting a few punches in before I blacked out. When I came to, the police were there and many of the egg-hunting children were gone, left in a hurry with their families because of the brawl. I was seen in an ambulance, and it was concluded I had a concussion. The police told me what I already found out. My wife was cheating on me. The word got around fast from people that went to our church, and she was pretty much shunned by all of them. As far as I know, she was practically banned from ever stepping foot in that church again. I couldn't imagine my wife willingly seeing a man, even planning a future with him, all behind my back. It felt like a nightmare. It came to light that he had a child from a previous marriage who was present at the egg hunt that my wife invited them to. AP told me that he was ending things with her, as well since he had no idea she was married. He mentioned that she begged him not to leave her and said that she told him I was abusive, which was completely made up. It was disturbing to me how my wife could sabotage our entire family all by one idiotic decision. This was enough to end everything we had together as a family, and it broke my heart. The kids and I didn't deserve this. I read posts about this in the past, but since I never did anything to betray my wife's trust, discourage her, or disappoint her, I never thought she would have a reason to cheat on me. I was just dumb for failing to realize this would happen to me. Opie, I am so sorry you and your sons had to go through this. I want you to know it was absolutely no fault of yours. She lied about you being abusive to make it look like she was only doing what any other battered woman would do. Leave the bad man and find a new love. The only problem is she didn't leave you, and you didn't deserve to be left. She just found a new love, lied, and pretended everything was fine to your face. She tried to justify leaving her family after 19 years by portraying you as a bad spouse. You must realize that this happens to men who least expect it every day, so you aren't dumb for failing to realize her deception. Just stay strong for your sons, and remember that you can make the best of this life change. Stay hopeful and remain honest in your relationships. There are honest and good women out there who are looking for a respectable man. Get out there, be honest, and find as many things as you can to be passionate about. I wish you the best of luck in life. Now, let's get into our second story for today. My wife and I were chefs in a gourmet kitchen in New York City. We knew each other for 14 years and were married for 9. We enjoyed every day together, working nearly identical shifts at the restaurant. Ratatouille was our favorite movie because our hats were identical. A year after the movie, I actually adopted 2 pet rats as a joke for my wife. She loved them. She told me months later she didn't know she could get so attached to rodents. Anyway, our relationship was great and full of imagination and happy times. After our passed away, We decided to conceive. When we struggled to do so, we took it as a sign to adopt. Our daughter's first birthday with us was her eighth. She had some emotional challenges that we worked through together, through honesty and patience. It felt like our family was strong and united. So, when I got a phone call from the police 2 years later, I was extremely confused. I was at the grocery store with my daughter, and as far as I knew, my wife was working a shift at restaurant. The police informed me that she was at the police station, unharmed, but they wanted to ask me some questions. I was a little unsettled, and my mind raced until I got there. With our daughter under my sister's watch, the police started asking me questions like, when did you find out what your wife was doing? And how long did you plot revenge against him? All I would ask, repeatedly, what is going on? Where was my wife? What happened? I had no idea what they were talking about, and after about an hour and a half of interrogation, they believed me. They verified that I was at the grocery store at the time of the attack on AP in his own home, while my wife was there having sex with him. He was stabbed by an intruder while he was in bed with her. The culprit was covered from head to toe and fled the scene. My wife was the one that called 911. I was terrified. I started crying uncontrollably. My wife cheated on me and experienced this traumatic event. Then I felt relieved that I was recorded at a different place during the attack, being the dedicated father I was determined to be. As I shopped for groceries, my wife was cheating on me. I felt so stupid, even though there was no way I could have known. Then the police told me this guy was in critical condition, and he was having an affair with more than 4 other women. My wife just happened to be there when someone else wanted revenge. They let me go, and I saw my wife waiting for me. She looked disturbed and restless. When she saw me, there was brief relief, followed by great sadness when she remembered she cheated on me. I walked right by her, refusing to speak. She followed me, crying and begging to talk about this. I told her we were over and that I planned to start seeing other people immediately. I sarcastically told her she made an excellent choice for an affair partner because he was very experienced. She admitted she was extremely stupid for sleeping with this guy after they talked for about 2 months on a dating app, but that was all he would ever amount to in her life. She pretty much demanded that I forgive her because she was worth it, and we already spent so many happy years together. I told her she ruined everything just before I slammed my car door and drove home. I called my parents and sister came over to help me through this time and try to make our home environment happy for my daughter. Within 24 hours, I filed for divorce. She tried to come home that same day and got into a fight with my parents when they refused to let her in. After some screaming, they actually managed to convince her to leave with just a few suitcases of her belongings. When our daughter saw her again, she told her she was very disappointed in her. Can you imagine that? Hearing that your 10-year-old adopted daughter is disappointed in you. After all we went through to adopt her and work through her emotional trauma, my wife let her down and made her a little less hopeful. That was enough punishment in itself, but my wife was obviously divorced by me, so she lost her home, and then she was also fired from the restaurant. I told our boss that we worked for the past 12 years, what happened, and how our relationship ended in the worst way possible. She lied to me that day. She didn't have a shift to work. They decided this made her untrustworthy and fired her for it. She was so deflated and disappointed in her life's new path that she didn't fight for her job. She just accepted it. She's still living at her parents', without a job or plans for the future. My daughter and I have been quite the opposite. Just hopeful and keeping ourselves busy. Besides work and school, we go hiking, camping, sailing, and travel to fun destinations. Opie, I don't understand how your wife didn't think of her husband or daughter before doing this and stopped dead in her tracks. I'm surprised every time I hear one of these stories that the spouse failed to have a moment of clarity where they decide not to destroy everything they built with a person they claim to love. It's hard to believe these cheaters even have normal emotions or might have understand what a relationship entails. They blow it, and once the trust and loyalty is gone, it's nearly impossible to recover. Things are never as they were before it happened, and it's always better to end the relationship. The emotional torment of staying together doesn't compare to the temporary adjustment of separation. At least in separation, there's newfound hope in the future instead of worry and paranoia. I believe that you made all the right decisions, given your circumstances, and wish nothing but the best for you and your daughter. You're an inspiration to us all. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. My wife, 23, and I, 26, were struggling to pay the bills for a while by the time I asked her to get a job. We had a newborn baby, so she'd been trying to work from home by starting her own business, but it was costing us more money than it was earning. It was really disappointing, and neither of us were feeling very hopeful at this time in our life. She agreed to get a part-time job and told me she started applying to anything around the area. Not even 3 days went by before she told me she was hired at a gas station down the street and she'd be working at night, so we didn't have to pay anyone to watch our newborn. It seemed like it was going to work out great. 2 weeks went by without a paycheck from her job, and I was missing my wife in bed. It was a hard adjustment, although my wife seemed really happy. She said she enjoyed her job, and it felt good to be making money for us. At least she was happy, I thought. Another week went by, and she still didn't have a paycheck. When I asked her what was taking so long, she said she accidentally put in the wrong account number on her direct deposit form. It was frustrating, but things happen, I thought. She continued working for another 2 weeks without a paycheck. I'd finally had enough. What would delay her paycheck for so long? Then I got the unsettling thought that maybe my wife wasn't going to work at all. She was very happy, didn't seem at all concerned about the money she was missing, and she would only ever tell me not to worry about it. So one night, I decided to have my friend follow her to work. I had to stay with the baby, and she wouldn't be looking for my friend's car. He called me after 35 minutes with really bad news. My wife had driven way past the gas station into some random house. She went inside, and he hasn't heard or seen anything since. My heart nearly stopped when I heard this. I told him to come get me. We took the baby to my mom's house on the way to this random house my wife was visiting. I tried to open the front door, even though my friend thought I was crazy. It was locked anyway. So I sat in the car with my friend watching the house and wondering what to do. Finally, 1 hour before her shift would end, the porch light came on, and she came out of the house with a man. He kissed her passionately on the lips before she left. Sweat started pouring out of me, and I felt like I was falling. My friend drove at a distance from her until she got to a diner. She spent my money to pay for her breakfast, so she didn't have a part-time job. She was going to this guy's house and spending the night every night. My friend didn't really know what to say, but it was good to just have someone there with me. I asked him what I should do, and he suggested I hire a PI. I couldn't afford that, but he did give me an idea. I asked him if he could sit outside the house at least one more time to get some pictures. Any pictures would help. He agreed. I also bought and installed a GPS tracker on my wife's car. It was so hard for me to resist following her or confronting her with what I found out. I waited 4 days to give my friend and the GPS tracker time to get some evidence. While I waited, I tried to figure out where I knew this man from. He looked so familiar, and it wasn't until I stopped thinking about it that his identity dawned on me. He was the pastor of a church I visited about 3 times years ago. He was married when I visited the church, but I wasn't sure if that was still the case. I sent him a friend request on Facebook, and he accepted it, probably assuming I was a churchgoer. I told my friend I knew who the guy was, and he said I would be either really pleased or really upset with the pictures he got. My friend went above and beyond to help me. He snuck up to the bedroom window of the house, using something to stand on to take pictures through the window. There was just enough light to tell that it was my wife, having sex with the pastor. He was right. I didn't know if I was pleased or upset. I was upset, but pleased I could prove she was cheating on me. It was time to turn my wife's world upside down. After she left for work one night, I took all my stuff and her son to my mom's house. I left divorce papers on the table, and right when my wife should have been arriving home, I posted the pictures my friend took and the GPS tracker information on Facebook. I tagged her, her friends and family, and the pastor himself. There was a digital explosion. All of the pastor's Facebook friends, including his wife, reacted to my post. All of my wife's friends and family commented, asking me what I was going to do, how she could do this, and offering me consolation. Some of them flat out insulted my wife, telling her she was a terrible person and didn't deserve to see her infant baby anymore. That was harsher than even I could be. My wife called me, dismayed and overwhelmed. She wasn't sure what to ask about first, but she started with asking me to take my post off Facebook. I refused. She asked me how I expected her to survive after divorce, and that was the stupidest question she could have asked. I said, "How about you get a job like you told me you were going to do, instead of sleeping with a married pastor behind my back?" She gasped, claiming she didn't know he was married. The divorce went super well for me. I won primary custody of our son, and my wife was ordered to pay me child support and alimony. She was able to keep the house because it was in her name, but she failed to make the mortgage payments. She had no choice but to move in with her parents, who lived out of state. They didn't want her to move in, but eventually said she could stay in the basement. It's good for her that her car was paid off by me at this point, because I'm sure that it would have been repoed if it wasn't. She called me often, crying. She missed our son and me. She admitted she'd been a lazy and inconsiderate wife. She swore she would never be the same person again, but it didn't matter to me anymore. The pastor's wife was on a missionary trip, while her husband had sex with my wife in their house. She filed for divorce as well, and actually thanked me for investigating and revealing what was going on. She asked me if I wanted to go out to dinner some night, and I agreed. It didn't take me long to be able to afford a new house for my son and I. My mom watches him each day, and she's never been happier. Things can work out, and time keeps moving even if you don't. I couldn't stop moving because my son depends on me. I've also started speaking positively to myself, choosing to focus on the goodness in life, rather than the negativity. Wow, Opie, what you've endured is an extremely difficult thing to go through. I'm so sorry your wife didn't consider you or your son before choosing to pretend she got a job. She made that selfish decision knowing it would only benefit her. I don't know what her plan would have been if she realized she never got a paycheck, but people who cheat don't usually think very far into the future or consider the possibilities of being caught. You absolutely made the right decision by getting a GPS tracker and asking your friend to take some pictures. I love how you remembered who this man was and actually added him as a friend on Facebook. It was an excellent decision to leave the house with your son and post the evidence just as your wife arrived home to an empty house and divorce papers. I have faith that you'll find a woman who's not only considerate of your wants and needs, but also accepts your son as her own. Now, let's get into today's second story. My wife admitted to me before our wedding that she got very drunk and slept with another man. She said she knew him a while before, off and on for years. She never saw him romantically, but that night she was so drunk she didn't even remember how she got to his house. She actually wasn't sure if she was drugged. Considering how honest and serious she was being, I went through marrying her. I was more nervous than before, but the fact that she confessed and wanted to be honest had to mean something, right? She swore to me that she would never speak to said man ever again. That was a necessary promise. She also promised she would never be unfaithful to me in marriage. We had a good marriage for 5 years. We argued sometimes, but it was about normal stuff, and we both knew how to control our anger and walk away or drop it if necessary. We always came back together afterwards and appreciated the other's maturity about the disagreement. That all meant nothing when I came home early from work one day. I thought my wife was still at work, but her car was in the driveway and another was parked on the side street. I didn't think too much of it and went inside. I heard a voice upstairs and thought maybe it was the TV. I got to the upstairs hallway and heard the bed squeaking, followed by moaning and a man's voice. Then my wife's voice and more moaning. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like my soul was floating above my body because I couldn't allow myself to register what was happening. It was my worst nightmare. I pushed the door open a little and saw my wife was doing my stepbrother. All the air left my lungs. I know I looked mortified, but my face couldn't have been as disturbed as theirs when they saw me watching them. They leaped up, but it was happening in slow motion to me. I remembered at this moment that I put a hidden camera in our bedroom 2 years ago. It was plunked in and set to record during the times I wasn't home. The camera would upload these videos onto my desktop through Wi-Fi. I hadn't even looked in the videos folder since I installed it because I never felt the need to. Thank God I'd forgotten about it, and thank God my wife never discovered it. Since she cheated before our wedding, I knew I needed to watch her, but my own stepbrother, I couldn't believe it. I was looking right at him, junk and all, and I couldn't believe it. We were never close, but I didn't think my wife and him ever had a chance to grow a relationship. I was wrong. Dead wrong. How many times had this happened? Was our bedroom the only place they'd had sex? My stepbrother still lived with my father and stepmom, so I'm sure they didn't go there. So it was at this point that I started screaming. I screamed for him to get out, which he did very quickly. My wife wanted to leave too, but she also wanted to apologize to me. No matter what she said, I hated it. I screamed at her, face red as a tomato I'm sure, to get out of my house. She hesitated, even though she was sobbing and gasping for air. When she didn't leave and tried saying pointless words to me, I grabbed a porcelain horse, a statue my wife cherished, and threw it across the room. It smashed into a million pieces, and she ran out of the house, holding her clothes. Thank God I didn't have any children with this woman. I think a part of me knew she was going to be unfaithful. I got on my desktop computer and found the video from Today Plus Some. She'd done this 7 times in our house, in our bed. One of those times, I had sex with her the same night. I posted their sex video on Facebook, tagging my wife and stepbrother. All of our family freaked out. They couldn't believe how uncensored the video was, and that my wife and stepbrother would stoop so low. My dad called me. He was crying. At this point, I felt kind of bad, but he only wanted to console me. He said he never wanted me to experience heartbreak, and the fact that it happened with my brother killed him. I told him it wasn't his fault, and if he wanted to help me, he needed to kick out my stepbrother. He agreed immediately. My wife tried arranging to meet with me so we could talk about things, but there was nothing to discuss. I told her she broke my heart and trust in everyone. After the affair fog wore off, my wife realized the magnitude of her actions. She didn't try to get anything from me in the divorce, and she accepted the fault and karma that followed. I kicked her out, and now she lives with a roommate. I'm happy to report that I still have a great job and a place to live. I got a dog and a dragon. When all of this first happened, I was pretty messed up emotionally and slept around with some women. I think I'm ready to get back into the dating scene, but I wanted to share my story first. I survived the worst moment in my life and recovered from the pain, blaming myself and wondering why. I realized that I am all I need, but the company of my pets and other women helped. Anyone can get through anything because as humans, we wouldn't have to endure anything we couldn't handle. Wow, Opie, you've experienced a very traumatic event. I am so sorry your wife failed to consider you in her decisions. She became selfish and egotistical. Anyone who genuinely loves their partner wouldn't hide anything from them, especially something of this magnitude. If your wife would have put your needs above her own, or even at the same level as hers, this wouldn't have happened. No one needs to be cheated on, but inconsiderate spouses only think about what they want or deserve. The ego is a dangerous thing that can easily get out of hand. You handled yourself as best you could and made the wise decision to divorce. Thank you for sharing your story, Opie. I have faith you'll be able to find a wise woman who communicates openly with you and honors you as her spouse. I wish you the best of luck going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. This is how my marriage fell apart. My wife, 30 female, was a teacher, and we just started trying to conceive. She always wanted children since she was young, but she was extremely careful and responsible by waiting until 4 years into marriage to try. I, 29 male, was ready to be a parent. I grew up without my father, only an abusive stepdad, so it became a dream of mine to coach, mentor, and love a child of my own. Knowing we could become pregnant, we started working hard. One evening, I was on the way home from a second part-time job that I hated when I stopped to get gas. My wife had left earlier that day to stay with her sister for a few days to comfort her over the passing of her old dog. When my bank card, joint with my wife's name, was declined, I checked the balance on my phone. There was a hold on the account from the Chattanooga hotel. That city in Tennessee was 75 miles from our home in Georgia. With that $200 hold, our available account balance was $0. Months prior, my wife maxed out our credit card to buy into some business proposition that she swore was going to make us money. Now stranded and furious, without a way to get gas, I called my wife. She didn't answer right away, and when she did on the fourth call, she sounded irritated. I asked her why there was a hold on the account for a hotel, and she stuttered, completely caught. She formulated a sentence that said her sister needed a getaway, some time away from home to grieve in luxury. I said I knew that was nonsense because she wouldn't take her sister 75 miles away to do that. She freaked out and started breathing and praying quietly. She then asked me to forgive her, but before I could respond, I heard another man's voice say, "What are you doing? Hang up." Then the call ended. I was beside myself with worry and betrayal. I called her family and told them what was going on. Her sister was extremely upset too, even more upset because she used her as a cover-up lie. Her dog hadn't even passed away yet. She stayed on the phone with me, just assuring me about the future and that I could get through this with or without my wife. It was up to me. I had the strength to face this. When my wife returned hours later, I wanted her to explain herself. I had to know why she did this and how she even knew AP. She was extremely apologetic, saying she met him online and this was the first time they met in person. She said they went to the movies, where AP lost his wallet. They went back for it, but they were closed. AP drove 7 hours to Chattanooga, so he needed her to reserve the hotel for them until he could pay for it with his wallet the next day. That's why the hold unexpectedly gave away her entire plan. She said she was glad I caught her because it was like a slap back to reality that stopped her from having sex with him. She was just trying to make it easier for me to forgive her and feel like nothing should stop us from continuing our marriage. I told her I couldn't believe a word that came out of her mouth and I would never trust her again. This went beyond sleeping with a stranger in a hotel. This was meeting, planning, talking, flirting, committing, scheming, and most importantly, still cheating on me. She took steps to make it happen to the point where it would be safer for me to assume she cheated. So I sent her away. She was completely shocked, like she really thought she could talk her way to forgiveness. She started crying, but I told her to stop because it would only waste precious time. I knew she wasn't the woman I should have children with. When I told her this, she dropped everything. She tried to reach for my hands, but I pulled away. I asked her why I would have children with a woman that lied to me and drove miles away to meet another man in a hotel room. She said since nothing actually happened and she was remorseful, I should stay married to her and continue to trust her. That didn't make sense at all from a betrayed perspective. She went to her sister's for real this time to live with her. Her sister was not happy, so their arrangement only lasted until she kicked her out a few months after our divorce was final. I was able to prove in the courts what kind of woman my wife really was. The real whammy in all of this that proves she would have continued her sneaky behavior is our phone records. I obtained them to show the court she was communicating with AP for a year and a half before they met in person. He wasn't the only person she communicated with, and she was actually getting paid by men online to send them nudes. OP. It is still considered cheating, even if she didn't sleep with anyone, although I believe she did. She was talking to AP for so long before you even found out that the chances of her showing any restraint or remorse is slim. This man was in a relationship with her and would have continued speaking to her, even if you didn't know about it. It's a much better option for your sanity in future to cut ties with a person that does this. There's no respect, consideration, or love in her actions. You deserve better than this, and I'm glad you did the right thing by leaving her. When we catch a spouse after having no idea there was something going on, it can be hard to lay down the law and do what's right for yourself. Don't live in denial and try to trust an untrustworthy person. Just part ways, separate your lives again, and find someone new after you do some personal healing and discovery. Thank you for sharing with us. Let's now get into our second story for today. My wife, 33 female, and I, 40 male, were married for 9 years before she cheated on me. She was really into flea marketing and collecting knickknacks. We lived with my brother in his house, but she had an RV camper and a garden in the front yard that she decorated and cared for. Whenever we went on camping trips, we brought our dog, but my wife really wanted to own cows. They were her favorite animal, and she was a farmer's daughter. While at a flea market one day, she met a man that owned several cow calves. As it turned out, this man was at the flea market weekly, just like her. They started setting up their tables side by side, and I was happy for her. She made a friend who shared her interests and made her laugh. I didn't find it odd or worry about her cheating on me with this man. She took a selfie with him, Mike, and posted it on Instagram, calling him a fellow junkie as a joke. He looked to be at least 10 years older than me. My wife and I met in college, where I had to fight off other guys, and our bond only became stronger in marriage. Her sister was cheated on by her husband, and whenever that happened, my wife talked about what a shame it is whenever someone cheats. She told me she was so thankful to have me as her husband, and that she would never break my heart like that. They were together every Saturday morning, so they started having breakfast together and sharing more personal details. We had him over for dinner, and he was a pretty likable guy. He actually came to a cookout that was technically a family reunion, so our whole family got to meet him. He started sharing tips and experiences with her father about his cows. Within a year, they became good friends. One summer, Mike invited my wife and me to camp on his mountain land. He was growing acres of oak trees to sell as his main source of income, so it was a great place to experience the outdoors. My wife insisted we go, so we took the RV camper and planned to stay for a week. I was a little nervous, but she convinced me it would turn out fine. She only wanted to take up his offer because he was lonely and needed friends. For 3 days, we had a great time meeting his cows, taking pictures, having cookouts, going fishing, and having campfires. In the middle of the fourth night, around 1 a.m., I sat straight up in bed when I couldn't feel my wife next to me. Since she wasn't in the camper, I went outside and called for her. I didn't hear anything, so I started walking toward Mike's cabin. On the way, the outdoor showers were within eyesight, and I caught a glimpse of a small light and what looked like the shape of bodies. I approached as quietly as I could until I could see what was happening. Mike was holding my wife against him in the shower, kissing her. Needless to say, they were both in their birthday suits. Just before I confronted them, I heard AP tell her he wanted to do it again. She excitedly agreed before I walked up to them and yelled, making them both jump and grab their towels. I asked what exactly they were going to do again. They stood there shamefully, swearing a little. It only took my wife a few seconds to start crying. I could tell she just didn't expect me to catch her, and she wished she could go back in time. AP stepped forward to apologize. He was an army vet, so I looked up to him, and it was harder for me to feel real anger towards him. He said he interfered in our relationship and he'd never forgive himself, but he suggested that I forgive my wife because it was him who asked her to do what I asked. He couldn't look me in the eye, so I knew what happened. When I realized the truth, my wife cried harder, called my name, and begged me to forgive her. It was so dramatic, and I hate drama. I remember feeling very numb before I found it possible to turn around, go back to the camper, and get my phone. I called my brother and told him everything. He couldn't believe my wife did this to me. He drove through the middle of the night on a country road to come pick me up and take me home. It was an hour-and-a-half drive, so while I waited, my wife awkwardly begged me to forgive her and called back my brother to tell him I didn't need a ride. She tried offering any kind of deal to get me to forgive her, failing to notice that there wasn't a proper way to recover from infidelity. Once that decision is made, it can't be undone. My wife came to the house to get her stuff gradually over time. Every time she came by, I had my brother talk to her if necessary, because I couldn't stand her. It might have been AP's idea for them to do things, but she made the choice to leave the camper and get naked for him. This was still her fault because she clearly didn't respect or care about me as her husband. She had the nerve to say it shouldn't even count because it happened so fast and she was half asleep. That was one of the last things I ever heard her say. She continued living on AP's property 2 years after our divorce. Then AP decided to sell the majority of his acreage and force my ex to leave. She tried to ask her father permission to park her RV at his house, but he refused. He was extremely disappointed in her and AP and didn't want to have anything to do with them. They betrayed everything he believed in when it came to trust, family, and relationships. Since she didn't have anywhere else to park her RV, she now lives in a campground alone. OP'd what happened here was most definitely her fault just as much as it was AP's. We don't really know who encouraged this affair to happen, but we can safely assume they both played a part because it wasn't forced. They were caught, so AP tried taking the blame, but that doesn't give him the right to pardon your wife's poor decision-making. If your wife truly wanted you to remain her husband, she never would have allowed herself to cheat on you. It doesn't sound like there was any problem in your marriage and nothing your wife would have wanted you to work on. She just gave in to her primal urges to mate with a man that impressed her or bonded with her. A relationship never has to become sexual. She would have remained an honorable wife and maintained all her relationships as they were, but instead she took that step that the marriage couldn't recover from. What a terrible display of loyalty on her part. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me.